My name is Emily, and this is the Confession Stories. Tonight's confession comes from a woman who walked into her father's retirement party as a ghost. Years ago, her family quietly erased her, cropped her out of photos, cut her out of speeches, rewrote their legacy without the daughter who did the work in the dark. They thought she'd stay gone. They thought the golden child would shine forever, and the forgotten one would never step back into the room. What they didn't expect was that the woman they tried to silence would be the only one in that ballroom holding receipts. Legal receipts, paper trails, court rulings. The kind of truth you can't edit with Photoshop or pretty speeches. At her father's party, her sister called her the maid in front of everyone. Her father looked away. And then someone in that room finally said the line that flipped the entire night. "Hi back, boss. This is Harper's story. A story about erasure, about legal legacies stolen and repackaged, about what happens when the girl they forgot grows into the woman they can no longer ignore. Stay with me until the end, because the real applause, it doesn't come from the ballroom. It comes from the people whose lives she changed, long after the music stops. Now take a breath, turn the volume up, and listen to Harper, in her own words.
My name is Harper Lane, and my family has always loved a good performance. Not honesty, not accountability, not messy, complicated truth. Performance. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. Cream-colored, thick, heavy enough that it felt important, just sitting there on my kitchen counter in Boston. It had the kind of raised gold crest you use when you still care what the neighbors think. The Lane family. Perfect, respectable, untouchable. I held it between my fingers for a long time before I opened it. Not because I was scared of what was inside, but because I already knew I wasn't wrong. You are cordially invited to the retirement celebration of Richard A. Lane. No, dear Harper. No, we'd love to see you. Just my name, misspelled, and a +1. Harper with 2 P's. I only have 1. It's funny how families will build an empire on your back, but never quite learn how to spell your name. It wasn't my father's handwriting, it wasn't my mother's either. The text was computer printed, emotionless, like a bank notice. I turned the card under the yellow light of my kitchen. The gold edges caught the light. The Lane crest glowed like something holy. Once upon a time, I would have mistaken that for a peace offering. Now, I knew better. Richard Lane doesn't do peace offerings. He does optics. 3 nights in a row, I left the invitation in the same spot on the counter. Close enough to see, far enough not to touch. I'd walk past it with my coffee in the morning and my glass of wine at night, pretending I hadn't noticed it still there, pretending I hadn't felt the old ache in my chest wake up again. On the 4th night, I finally said it out loud to an empty apartment. Why now? But I already knew the answer. This wasn't about me. It was about them. About how it would look if the estranged daughter wasn't invited to the retirement gala of Boston's so-called builder of futures. They hadn't called me in years. They had erased me from photos, programs, speeches. But legally, technically, publicly, they needed me invited, a checkbox, a formality, an empty seat they could point at and say, "We tried. She chose not to come." Except this time, I wasn't going to give them that line. I poured myself a glass of red, opened my laptop, and pulled up the RSVP link. The event page glowed back at me. The Lane Legacy, celebrating 40 years of leadership for me. Legacy. That was their favorite word, especially when my contributions were being cut out of the frame. I clicked accept, not to reconcile, not to forgive, not to sit quietly in the corner and prove I could still be obedient. I accepted because I refused to let them write a final chapter about Richard Lane's career. With my name scrubbed out like I'd never existed. They'd tried to erase me before. This time, I was going to write myself back in. In the night of the party, Boston felt like it couldn't decide what season it wanted. Early fall, a little cold around the edges, but still pretending to be summer. I drove along the Charles, past joggers in expensive athleisure, and couples taking photos like the city was their private backdrop. The retirement party was at the Harper Crest Club, one of those waterfront places you only get into if somebody powerful signs your check. White columns, valet out front, big glass windows so everyone inside could see everyone else seeing them. The valet looked about 21, soft jawline, nervous energy, trying very hard to sound professional. "Good evening, ma'am. Name?" "Harper Lane." He looked down at his clipboard. His eyes moved once, twice, then stalled. "I'm sorry, could you spell that?" I did, slowly, clearly. I'd done this my entire life, explaining my own existence to people who didn't expect me to be where I was standing. He scanned the list again, his brows pulled together. I'm so sorry, Ms. Lane, you're not on the list." Of course I wasn't. This wasn't an oversight, this was a message. He fumbled for his radio, whispered something about a potential guest mix-up. The silence on the other end lasted just a second too long. Then a crackle. A voice. "Let her through." His posture changed instantly. "Apologies, ma'am. You're all set." I stepped out of the car and handed over my keys. My heels clicked quietly against the stone path as I walked toward the entrance. No one came to greet me. No one was waiting at the door. Of course they weren't. Inside, the ballroom glowed with chandeliers that probably cost more than my law school tuition. The room hummed with conversation. Donors in dark suits, city officials, old money, new money pretending to be old. A jazz trio in the corner played something soft and forgettable. I walked down the hallway lined with framed photos. Richard Lane cutting ribbons. Richard Lane shaking hands with mayors. Richard Lane standing in front of shiny new developments he'd built on land people like my clients used to live on. Then came the family photos. There was my younger sister, Camilla, the star of every frame. Camilla at 10, holding a science fair trophy. Camilla at 21, in a cap and gown from Brown. Camilla at some charity gala, smiling like she had never doubted her place in the world. And me, I wasn't there. I stopped in front of one picture I knew I'd been in. Christmas, years ago. I remembered the dress, the itchy tights, the way my mother had scolded me for slouching. In the photo on the wall, there was my father. There was my mother. There was Camilla. And where I had been standing, there was a tree. They had literally replaced me with a Christmas tree. Being hated hurts. Being invisible? That feels like you never existed in the first place. A server with a kind face appeared at my side before anyone in my family even glanced my way. "Sparkling water? Champagne?" she asked. "Water, please." She didn't flinch at my name or look past me for someone more important. She just handed me a glass and said, "If you need anything, I'll be right by the doors." The first words of kindness I heard that night came from someone who was paid to be there. She led me to table 12, back corner, partially hidden by a column, right next to the swinging kitchen doors where the servers came in and out with plates and trays, like a heartbeat for the room no one wanted to see. No name card, just a folded white napkin. Disposable. When I was 10, my aunt had told me, "You're so good with the tray, sweetheart. Why don't you help refill the glasses while Camilla plays the piano?" Camilla played. She hit every note. She got a standing ovation. I wiped fingerprints off champagne flutes and learned that night what my role was supposed to be. Not the star on stage, but the hands that made sure everyone else could keep clapping. From table 12, I had a perfect view of the main table. My father, Richard, sat at the center, navy suit, silver hair, still playing the part of the man who built half the city. My mother, Diane, was beside him, pearls, posture, and a smile that never reached her eyes anymore, if it ever had. And there, in a fitted emerald dress that probably cost more than one of my clients' yearly rent, sat Camilla. Her hair fell in soft curls over one bare shoulder. Her makeup was effortless in the way that takes a professional team 3 hours. She leaned in toward a city council member, hand resting lightly on our father's arm, laughing like the whole room had been put there to listen to her. They didn't look at me, not once. A cousin of ours, Mark, walked past my table with his wife. He did a half-double take when he saw me like I was a painting slightly hung crooked. "Hey, wow," he said, voice pitched a little too high. "Long time, Harp." He used the childhood nickname I'd stopped responding to years ago. "Yeah," I said. "A while." His wife smiled politely, in the way people do when they're not sure if they're supposed to acknowledge the scandal family member or ignore her. "We're at table 2, Mark added quickly, nodding toward the front. "Right up by your dad." Of course he was. "Enjoy," I said. He hesitated, glanced at my empty place setting, no name tag, just the napkin, and then decided to pretend he hadn't noticed. "Good to see you," he lied, and walked away. The chair under me wobbled when I shifted my weight. I pressed my heel against the floor to steady it. Even the furniture seemed to know where I stood in this family. Off-center, unstable, one adjustment away from collapsing. But what they didn't know, I hadn't come to stay seated. As I watched the room, memories layered themselves over the present like transparencies on an old projector. 13 years old, refilling wine glasses while adults spoke over my head about markets and mergers and those people who didn't know how to manage their money. 17, standing on a small stage at the state capitol, reading my award-winning essay on housing inequality to a room full of strangers. My father had said he was too busy to attend. My mother had lost track of time. Camilla had a hair appointment, 26, passing the bar exam on the first try. I'd waited all day for a call. It never came. At 10 p.m., my phone buzzed with a one-line email from my father. "Good, that'll be useful." No proud of you, no congratulations, just utilitarian approval, like I just picked up an extra degree for the family wall and not fought my way through 3 years of stress and student loans. I became a public interest attorney. I chose housing law because someone needed to stand between families and the bulldozers my father's friends liked to send. In private, my father called my work emotional charity law. In public, when donors asked about me, he'd say, "This is my older daughter. She does something with tenants." He never quite got the job title right. But Camilla? Camilla was the future of the Lane legacy. She started a nonprofit, on paper. I wrote its articles of incorporation. I drafted its bylaws. I wrote the language for its first grant proposals. When a developer threatened a lawsuit that could have shuttered her entire operation before it really began, I stayed up 3 nights in a row drafting the brief that kept the case from blowing up in her face. On every brochure, every press release, every glossy website bio, her name shined in bold. Mine sat in 6-point font at the bottom, or was left off entirely, buried in a line that read, "Legal counsel by outside partners." That outside partner was me. A server set down a breadbasket in the center of our table. The couple beside me murmured to each other about stock prices, the newest restaurant opening, whether the dessert would be worth the calories. No one asked who I was. No one asked how I'd been. To them, I was filler. A body in a chair so table 12 didn't look empty in the photos. A woman in a black suit approached my table with a clipboard in hand. She wasn't family. She belonged to the venue. "Judge Lane?" she asked. The title still felt new, like a pair of shoes I wasn't sure I'd broken in yet. "Yes," I said. She smiled. No history in her eyes, no gossip, just professional respect. "Mr. Lane asked that you be seated here," she explained, gesturing to the table. "If you need to step out at any point, staff can show you to a quieter lounge in the back." Of course he had thought that far ahead. He'd planned my distance, my visibility, the angle from which the donors would see me, close enough to look generous, far enough that I couldn't be mistaken for part of the main act. Put the daughter who became a judge by the kitchen doors, where she can watch the staff move. That was where I'd always belonged in his mind, behind the work, not in the picture. The jazz quieted. Someone tapped a microphone. The sound cut clean through the noise of cutlery and small talk. The host stepped up onto the small stage, smile bright and practiced, voice amplified and smooth. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "to open our celebration of Richard Lane's extraordinary legacy, please welcome his greatest achievement, his daughter Camilla Lane." My napkin crumpled in my hand before I even realized I'd grabbed it that tight. The linen pressed into my palm, leaving faint imprints like teeth marks. Camilla walked to the stage like she'd been born on it. Her heels made no sound. Her dress caught the light just right. The chandelier above her seemed to lean down, throwing a soft halo around her shoulders, as if even the fixtures in this place knew who the star was supposed to be. She stood at the microphone, lifted her champagne flute, and gave the crowd that smile, the Lane smile, polished, unshakable, camera ready. "I want to thank you all for being here tonight," she began. "My father is the man who taught me what legacy really means." Applause, nods. A few misty eyes already. She launched into her speech, walking the room through a highlight reel of her life. How Dad coached her for her high school debate championship. How he read her college essays out loud at dinner. How he spent late nights helping her shape her nonprofit's mission. Every story made the room lean in closer. Every story placed her securely, irrevocably in the center of his legacy. Not a single sentence included me. It wasn't that she forgot. It was that she wanted everyone else to. I stared at the condensation on my water glass, my thumb tracing slow circles. The cold ring left on the tablecloth felt like a clock counting something down. 9th grade flashed back. I'd stood on that little stage at the state capitol reading my essay on why housing is a human right. Hands shaking, but voice steady. I'd looked for my family in the audience and seen only strangers. That night, I ate dinner alone at our kitchen table, the small plaque propped up beside my plate like a silent witness. I didn't bring it up. I didn't say, "I won." It hurt less to act like it didn't matter. On stage, Camilla said, "We, the Lanes, build communities from the inside out." The room erupted in applause. She wasn't just telling a story, she was bleaching it, scrubbing out my part, polishing hers until it gleamed. My phone lay face down on the table beside my fork. I flipped it over, opened the Notes app under the table, and started typing. Dates, case names, rulings, the nonprofit lawsuit she'd nearly lost, the one where a disgruntled partner accused her board of misusing funds. I remembered sitting at my dining table, laptop open, coffee gone cold, drafting and redrafting arguments until the sun rose and the birds started singing outside my apartment window, while Camilla slept, trusting that I would figure it out, like I always did. She had sent me a 2-word text when the case was dismissed. We're safe. Not thank you. Not I owe you. Just we're safe, as if safety had magically appeared overnight, not been carved out word by word in legal briefs with my name at the bottom. I didn't type out of spite. I typed because watching my work paraded on stage under someone else's name made me feel like I was drowning in a story where I'd been both the ghostwriter and the ghost. Camilla lifted her glass higher. To my father, she said, voice catching just enough to sound sincere. The man who built a legacy worth continuing. The crowd stood. Chairs scraped back. Glasses clinked. The words legacy and Lane wrapped themselves around that room like ribbon on a gift I had never been allowed to unwrap. My own glass stayed on the table, untouched. Some toasts seal truth. This one was poison in prettier glass, and I wasn't drinking it anymore. When the applause finally thinned out into scattered chatter and the clink of glassware, I stood up from table 12 and walked toward the bar. Not because I needed alcohol, but because I needed distance. The air felt too warm near the head table, too perfumed, too rehearsed. I wanted something cold and simple, something that didn't pretend to be anything it wasn't. As I passed my father's table, I slowed just enough that he would have to see me. He did. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. I waited, not for an apology, not even for affection, just for basic acknowledgement. A nod, a tightening at the corner of his mouth, a simple, "You're here." Instead, he glanced down at the cuff of his shirt, smoothed an invisible wrinkle, and turned back to the man beside him, a donor I recognized from a recent article about downtown redevelopment. My presence didn't interrupt his sentence, didn't even put a comma in it. Some men build skyscrapers. Some men build walls. My father built both, and sometimes I wasn't sure which one was taller. At the bar, I set my clutch down and rested my hands on the cool marble. "Can I get you something?" the bartender asked. "Water with lemon," I said. "Lots of ice." He nodded and didn't look surprised or disappointed that I wasn't ordering something on the top shelf. He just filled a tall glass, added a wedge of lemon, and slid it over with a quiet, "Here you go, Judge." He'd read my name tag, the one the venue had given me, not the family. It was ridiculous how much that small word did more for me than any of the speeches tonight. My phone buzzed in my clutch. I knew who it was before I looked. My mother and I have always had a certain timing. She never calls when I'm alone on my couch needing to hear a familiar voice. She calls when I'm already holding too much. I checked the screen. "Mom, Harper, please don't escalate anything. Tonight means a lot to your father. Camilla's under a lot of pressure." I could hear her voice in that message. The tight, gentle tone she used when she wanted me to bend without making it sound like she was asking. Understand her, Harper. Be the bigger person, Harper. Don't make a scene, Harper. She had never once texted, "This must be hard for you." She had never written, "I'm sorry we hurt you." I stared at the words until they blurred slightly, then slid the phone back into my clutch without replying. I've always been the peacemaker, the the mediator, the one who translated harsh words into something digestible so they didn't ruin dinner. If someone snapped, I softened it. If someone lied, I dressed it up as misunderstood. If someone hurt me, I made sure no one else felt uncomfortable about it. Here's the secret no one tells you about being the peacemaker. You bleed quietly so everyone else can keep eating. That night, I decided I was done bleeding for people who wouldn't even admit they were holding the knife. I took a sip of my water. It tasted sharper than it should have, like my own anger was dissolving in it. A familiar face appeared at my elbow, a woman in a fitted navy dress, hair swept into a sleek chignon. "Wow," she said, tilting her head. "It really is you." It took me a second to place her. Then I remembered. Lena. She'd gone to law school with Camilla, part of that bright, shiny friend group that used our house as their hangout and me as their unpaid proofreader. "You've been gone a while," she said, like she was commenting on a piece of furniture that used to sit in the foyer. "I've been working," I replied. She glanced toward the main table where Camilla was still holding court. Camilla's done so much, hasn't she? The nonprofit, the partnerships. It's really amazing the impact she's had. I let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. "Yes," I said evenly. "She's very good at repackaging other people's work." Lena's smile froze. Her eyes flicked to my face, then away, then back again, as if she was debating whether to play dumb or admit she understood exactly what I meant. "That's a strong way to put it," she offered. "It's a factual way to put it," I answered. "Check the authors on the filings, then check the names in the speeches." The silence between us felt sharp, like a freshly cut edge paper. I didn't rush to fill it. For once, I let someone else sit in the discomfort. "I should find my seat," Lena finally muttered. "It was nice seeing you." She walked away with her glass held a little too tightly. I turned back to the bar and tapped my fingers once against the marble. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't thrown a drink. I hadn't done any of the things my family would later accuse me of almost doing. All I'd done was say the quiet part, slightly less quiet. I headed back toward table 12. The music had shifted to something slower, more background than performance. The jazz trio played like they were hoping no one would notice them at all. Halfway there, a young server rushed up to me, cheeks flushed from running plates. His bow tie was slightly crooked, and there was a small stain on his cuff. The kind of human detail my mother would have noticed and judged instantly. "Excuse me, Ms. Lane," he whispered, slightly out of breath. "Your sister asked if you'd mind helping pass champagne for the next toast. She said you've always been great with guests." There it was, not a misunderstanding. Not a slip of the tongue. A deliberate choice. Humiliation sent by courier. Camilla knew exactly what she was doing. If I helped, I'd be back in my childhood role, the helper, the server, the one carrying trays so she could stand under the lights. If I refused, she'd get to tell everyone later that I'd made a scene, that I couldn't just do one simple thing to support the family. I stared at the tray. The glasses shimmered under the chandelier, tiny golden bubbles racing to the surface as if trying to escape. The young man's hands shook just enough that I felt bad for him. "This isn't about you," I said gently. "You're doing your job." He nodded, shoulders relaxing just a fraction. Then I let my voice cool. "Tell my sister," I said, "that I'm retired from unpaid labor." His eyebrows lifted slightly. Then he gave a tiny, almost involuntary smile. The kind people give when they've just watched someone say something they wish they could say, too. "I'll let her know," he replied, before slipping back into the crowd. Across the room, I heard a man tell my father, "That slideshow was incredible. Tell Camilla it almost made me cry." I looked toward the screen. The final frame still glowed. "To Richard Lane, builder of futures, from your forever girl, Camilla." My stomach twisted like someone had gripped it and wrung it out. That slideshow had taken me 8 nights. 8 nights of squinting at old photographs under a dusty lamp in my mother's basement, of wiping dirt off Polaroids with the edge of my shirt, of scanning each image, adjusting the color so the faded edges look less like evidence and more like memory. 8 nights of replaying my childhood in still images. Dad holding both of us at a park. The version on the screen tonight included only him and Camilla. A birthday party where I'd been the one holding the cake. Tonight's version showed only the candles and her face. A groundbreaking ceremony where I'd been at his side. Tonight, that photo had been replaced by one of him and a city councilman instead. I had chosen the music, a Coltrane piece he used to play on Sunday mornings while reading the paper. I had built the timeline, made sure the shots from his early days blended into his golden years in a way that made sense emotionally, not just chronologically. I had edited out the moments that would have embarrassed him, the times he'd lost his temper, the projects that had gone wrong, the year he barely came home. I had emailed it all to my mother with a message that read, "If he plays this, it'll mean something to both of us." She never replied, but here it was, playing on loop, my work, her credit, his legacy, my absence. At table 12, a woman in a red dress leaned toward me as the room dispersed toward the buffet. "Camilla really has an eye for presentation," she said, smiling. "That video was just stunning." I looked at her. My anger had cooled by then into something heavier, denser, less like fire and more like stone. "Yes," I replied, "especially when she borrows someone else's lens." Her smile faltered, then drooped at the corners. "Oh," she said, "I didn't realize you—" "Most people don't," I cut in. Not harsh, just honest. "That's kind of the point." She looked down at her plate. She didn't say anything else. For the first time all evening, I felt steady. Not happy, not vindicated, just done pretending. I picked up a cocktail napkin and a pen from the center of the table. My hand shook, not from fear, but from the weight of finally choosing a different script. I wrote 4 words. You missed one slide. The period at the end felt like a gavel. Then I stood and walked toward the AV booth tucked behind a curtain near the DJ. The technician, a guy in his late 20s with headphones around his neck, looked startled when I appeared. "Hey, sorry, this area's kind of—" "There's one more image," I said, holding up the napkin. "It belongs in the story." He glanced at the napkin, then at my face, then past me, like he was expecting security to materialize. "I don't know if I'm allowed to—" "You want the full version of the Lane legacy, don't you?" I asked quietly. "This will help." I held out a small flash drive I'd slipped into my clutch before leaving home, a habit from years of court. Always bring the file no one expects you to use. His curiosity won over his caution. It always does in people who secretly like doing the right thing. He took the drive, swallowed, and nodded. "I'll see what I can do," he said. I didn't stay to watch him load it. I didn't hover to make sure he'd really do it. I just walked back to my seat and waited. A few minutes later, the lights dimmed slightly as someone called for "Everyone's attention, please," for a second round of tributes. The screen at the front of the room flickered back to life, starting again from the final section of the slideshow. The greatest hits of Richard Lane, the ribbon cuttings, the framed awards, the posed smiles. Camilla's dedication slide appeared again. "To Richard Lane, builder of futures, from your forever girl." A few people clapped softly, like this was their favorite part. And then the image changed. The new slide was a photo I had kept in my desk drawer for years. Me in a navy suit, hair pulled back, dark circles under my eyes from too many late nights at the legal clinic. My father beside me, one arm around my shoulders, standing on the courthouse steps. We weren't perfectly posed. My hair had a loose strand. He wasn't even looking directly at the camera. But he was smiling. A small, real smile I'd barely seen before or since. The picture had been taken after my first major housing case, the one that forced a landlord to stop illegal evictions across an entire block and pay damages to the families he tried to push out. The caption under the photo read, in simple white font, "First case won, truth served, family, regardless." The ballroom went silent in a way it hadn't been all night. It wasn't the silence of boredom, or the silence of waiting for the next joke. It was the silence of people realizing that there was a piece of the story they hadn't been told. I watched my father's face. His jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed just slightly. His hand, resting on the table, stilled. He knew exactly when that photo had been taken. He knew exactly who had argued that case. On the edge of the stage, Camilla's smile twitched, just a fraction, like a portrait that had finally cracked under the weight of too much light. Her hand tightened around the stem of her glass. No one clapped. No one laughed. No one said, "Oh, that must be a mistake." They just looked at him, at me, at the screen, at the one slide no one had expected to see, and the one he'd never bothered to show. I didn't stand. I didn't bow. I didn't raise my glass. I just sat there at table 12 and, for the first time in a very long time, simply existed in my family's story, in a way they couldn't crop out anymore. You'd think that one slide would be enough. One picture. One line of text. One quiet crack in the perfect porcelain of the Lane family story. But families like mine don't explode in one moment. They fracture slowly, like glass under pressure. The break is invisible until the whole thing gives way. I slipped away from table 12 for a few minutes, letting the room adjust to whatever it had just seen. Near the dessert table, I heard it. The kind of half-whispered gossip rich people think is harmless because they say it over creme brulee instead of in a parking lot. "Didn't she almost lose her bar license?" a man asked, his voice low but not low enough. "Yeah," another replied. Something about emotional instability in court, or burnout. I don't really remember. "It's always the ones who try too hard." They hadn't realized I was standing on the other side of a ridiculous floral arrangement, close enough to smell their whiskey. I stepped out from behind the lilies. "I didn't almost lose my license," I said calmly. I pushed back on a judge who was fast-tracking an eviction case without reading the actual file. There's a difference. Both men froze. One coughed. The other set his spoon down a little too carefully. "I also won that appeal," I added. "The court quietly changed its procedures after that. You're welcome." They stared at me like I'd walked out of the TV they leave on in the background, familiar but not supposed to speak directly to them. I didn't mean anything by it, the first man muttered. I know, I replied. That's the problem. I left them standing there, trying to figure out whether they'd just been scolded or educated. The west hallway was quieter. Soft sconces, polished floors, more photos, always more photos. The wall was a shrine to my father's version of himself. Ribbon cuttings, charity galas, staged candids with people whose names appeared on donor lists and campaign flyers. Then I saw it, the one that always made my chest tighten even before I'd admitted why. The Metropolitan Civic Gala. 5 years ago, I had been the one presenting my father with an award that night. Outstanding contribution to urban development. On stage, I'd stood at the podium, introduced him, handed him the plaque. A photographer had caught the exact moment our hands met, my arm outstretched with the award, his reaching to take it, both of us framed by the city's logo behind us. In the framed version on this wall, I wasn't there. The shot had been cropped brutally tight. Richard Lane holding the plaque, smiling, the podium behind him. And at the far right edge of the photo, barely visible if you didn't know where to look, the corner of a navy sleeve. Mine. I stood there and let that sink in. They didn't just forget me, they didn't just lose photos where I happened to be present. They had edited me out, deliberately, over and over. The slideshow, the family portraits, the gala photos. Anywhere my presence complicated the narrative, they'd taken a metaphorical crop tool to it and trimmed me off the side. I took my phone out, snapped a picture, and sent it to Dana with a simple caption. They keep cropping. I'm done shrinking. Her response came almost instantly. Then stop standing at the edge of the frame, move. When I walked back toward the ballroom, the energy had shifted in that subtle way rooms do when enough people are pretending nothing has changed. The band played, the servers moved. The laughter was a touch too loud in some corners and a little too quiet in others. That's when I saw Ethan, Camilla's fiancé. He stood near the grand piano, away from the cluster of people around my father. His tie was loosened just enough to suggest he wasn't as comfortable as everyone else. He looked like a man halfway between two worlds, the one he'd grown up in and the one he'd agreed to marry into. His eyes weren't on Camilla. They were on me. We hadn't spoken in over a year, not since the last case I'd quietly helped him with, the one that had almost gone sideways because he'd believed a senior partner over his own instincts. I'd been the one on the phone at 1:47 a.m., pulling up case law, rewriting his closing argument so he wouldn't sink his career trying to impress the wrong people. He thanked me then, privately. And then he'd gone right back to playing his role in Camilla's carefully curated life. Until now. He started walking toward me, not fast, not hesitant, just decided. Across the room, I saw Camilla notice. Her posture straightened, her hand tightened around her glass. Her smile brightened half a watt too much. Ethan didn't stop at her side. He didn't even slow down. He stopped in front of me. "Hi back, boss," he said. The words weren't loud, but the room heard them anyway. Several conversations broke off mid-sentence. A laugh died halfway out of someone's throat. You could feel attention swivel, the way birds turn in the sky all at once. I didn't answer right away. I just looked at him, letting the moment breathe until it was big enough that no one could pretend they'd missed it. Then he turned, just slightly, so he wasn't only talking to me anymore. When I was one bad hearing away from losing my position, he said, voice steady, one person stayed up emailing me case notes at 2 a.m. He didn't gesture, he didn't point, he didn't need to. She rewrote my argument, he went on. She flagged the case that changed the judge's mind. She saved my job. He didn't say my name, but every pair of eyes in that room had already connected the dots. Respect doesn't always show up with the right last name. Sometimes it stands at the back of the room in a navy suit, waiting for someone to stop pretending not to see it. Camilla let out a laugh, too high, too quick. "Oh, Ethan," she called out, aiming for playful and landing somewhere close to brittle. "Don't embarrass her." I turned my head toward her, slowly. "Embarrassment requires shame," I said. "I don't carry that anymore." The silence that followed wasn't the comfortable kind. It stuck to the edges of the room, thick and undeniable. Someone shifted their weight. Someone cleared their throat. No one rushed in with a joke. No one tried to smooth it over with a cheerful, "You know how sisters are." Across the table, my father watched me with a look I hadn't seen before. It wasn't pride. It wasn't hatred. It was uncertainty, like he was finally seeing me clearly and didn't yet know whether that was a problem or a solution. Ethan gave me a small nod, the kind that says, "I should have done this sooner," then stepped back and into the crowd. He didn't go to Camilla's side, not right away. He moved behind her, slightly off to the side, close enough to be counted, far enough to make a point. I could have left then. That would have been a decent ending. But my family doesn't know when to stop. Later, when the photographer clapped his hands and called out, "Can we have the Lane family for a photo, please?" I felt the weight of half the room's gaze tilt toward me. Camilla stepped forward first, of course. My parents followed. A few strategically chosen relatives drifted in behind them. The photographer squinted over his camera. "Miss, are you—" he started, looking my way. "You can take it without me," I said, gentle but firm. "I brought my own frame tonight." I didn't go stand under the chandelier. I didn't tuck myself into the far edge of their lineup to be cropped out later. Instead, I walked to the reception table near the entrance where they'd arranged the slideshow plaque, the Lane crest, and a leather-bound guest book full of blessings from people who'd never see the courtrooms where my clients cried. From my clutch, I pulled out a plain black folder, the one I'd debated bringing all week. I set it down beside the plaque, flipped it open, and let it stay there. Inside, neatly organized in plastic sleeves, letters from judges, commendations from the state bar, printouts of legal journal features, clippings from local newspapers about the housing policies I'd helped write, the injunctions I'd argued, the reforms that bore my name in small print on page 4. No gold foil, no embossed crest, no family motto. Just work that changed more than skylines. Work measured not in square footage, but in families still having keys that fit locks. I didn't grab the mic. I didn't tap a glass. I didn't say, "Look at me." I just made the truth available and walked away. It didn't take long. People who actually cared about this city, professors, council staffers, community organizers, have a nose for source material. A law professor I recognized from a symposium leaned over the folder first. "She wrote this?" he asked, turning to my father, holding up one of the clippings. "The foundational brief your daughter's nonprofit cites on their website?" My father hesitated just long enough to answer without words. His silence used to protect Camilla. Tonight, it indicted her. Another guest, A woman in her 50s with a university badge joined them. Her ruling on tenant protections 2 years ago, she said. It's the reason my sister's building wasn't condemned. It bought them time to organize. They still talk about Judge Lane like she's a ghost that turned the lights back on. She didn't look at me when she said it. She looked at my father, at the builder of futures, and asked, without asking, "Did you know what your daughter has been building while you were busy cutting ribbons?" Across the way, I heard Camilla say loudly, "She's just doing this for attention." A woman beside her, one of the donors who'd previously been laughing at her jokes, replied quietly but clearly enough, "No, she's reminding us where the attention should have gone." That was it. No screaming, no broken glass, no dramatic walkouts, just a shift, like a gavel touching wood, soft, final. The story of the Lane legacy had a new paragraph now, whether they liked it or not. I slipped out of the ballroom without anyone blocking my path. No one tried to stop me with forced small talk. No one rushed over to guilt me into staying just a bit longer. At the top of the stone steps outside, the air felt cooler, like the building itself had been holding its breath, and finally exhaled me out. "Ms. Lane?" a voice called behind me. I turned. It was the young staff member from earlier, the one I'd seen hovering near the AV booth, carrying cables and taping down wires. "I just wanted to say thank you," they said, voice shaky but earnest. "Your tenant protection ruling last year, the one about no-fault evictions, it kept my mom in our apartment when our landlord tried to clear the building. She still cries when she talks about it." My throat tightened in a way it hadn't all night. All evening, the room had been debating my value in terms of optics, reputation, legacy. This was simpler. A person, a home, a life that hadn't been uprooted. "I'm studying law now," they added, cheeks flushing, "because of that case, because of you." The chandelier light from inside spilled onto the stone steps, framing them in a halo far more honest than the one over my sister's head. "Then I guess it was worth it," I said quietly. They smiled, wide, unpolished, hopeful, and ducked back inside before I could say anything else. Sometimes the real applause doesn't echo off a ballroom ceiling. Sometimes it catches you on the sidewalk, in a borrowed blazer, saying thank you before sprinting back to clock in. There was no grand apology after that. My father didn't rush down the stairs to ask for forgiveness. My mother didn't appear in the doorway, mascara running, whispering, "We were wrong." Camilla didn't crumble to the floor in a puddle of regret. No one gave me closure, so I gave it to myself. I walked to my car, the night cool against my bare arms. Inside, I tossed my clutch onto the passenger seat, kicked off my heels, and stared at them for a moment. They were beautiful. They were painful. They were the perfect metaphor for my entire childhood. I set them aside and started the engine. Driving barefoot felt honest. At the first red light, I reached for my phone and opened the browser tab I'd left sitting for months, the one with the Lane family estate filings, financial trusts, property transfers. I'd been checking it like a scar, always prodding to see if it still hurt, always looking for my name to reappear somewhere. As a beneficiary, as a trustee, as anything other than a ghost. It never did. I scrolled once, slowly, then I closed the tab, not in anger, in surrender, not to them, but to the fact that I didn't need to keep auditioning for a legacy that had already decided I wasn't in it. Back home, my apartment felt smaller than the ballroom, but infinitely more real. I hung my blazer on the back of a chair, washed my face, and made myself a cup of tea I knew I wouldn't finish. Then I opened my laptop and pulled up an email draft I'd been ignoring for weeks, an offer from a local law school to teach a seminar on housing justice. "We'd be honored to have you as a guest lecturer, Judge Lane," it read. For days, I'd wondered if taking it would look like admitting I'd settled, like stepping away from the front lines. Tonight, it felt like something else, a different kind of courtroom, one where the next generation was the jury. I typed one sentence. "Thank you for the opportunity. I'd be honored to teach the course." Then I hit send before I could talk myself out of it. Next, I opened a blank document and wrote a title at the top, Unseen Precedents, Episode 1. Underneath it, I typed, "The Law of Invisible Labor, How the Helpers Become the Ghosts and How They Stop." I didn't know yet if it would be a podcast, a lecture series, a book. All I knew was that I was done letting other people tell my story and call it inspiration while using my work as props. A week later, an email from a local news outlet landed in my inbox. Judge Harper Lane joins Housing Equity Advisory Board. My name, spelled correctly, in bold, next to officials who had never tried to crop me out of a photo. I didn't screenshot it to send to my parents. I didn't forward it to my mother. I just started for myself and moved on. A few days after that, a cream-colored envelope appeared in my mailbox. No crest this time, just my address in my mother's handwriting. Inside was a store-bought birthday card with pre-printed cursive, "Hope your day is as special as you are." She'd signed, "Love, Mom," and underlined love like it could stretch across everything that came before. There was no apology, no mention of the party, no acknowledgement of what had happened. I slid the card halfway back into the envelope and then dropped it gently into the recycling bin. Not with fury, with clarity. Some ghosts don't deserve a second haunting. That night, I opened a folder on my laptop labeled Personal Legal. I started drafting paperwork I'd put off for years, not because of complicated assets, but because of complicated emotions. A living trust, a power of attorney, not for my father's estate, for mine. I typed my full name into the line for trustee, Harper Elaine Lane. No witnesses required for this part, no family signatures, just me, choosing myself on paper in a way my parents never had. A few nights later, I went to a rooftop bar alone. No gala, no program, no assigned seating, just the city spread out below, windows lit like tiny verdicts delivered across blocks I knew too well from case files. I ordered one glass of Prosecco and took it to a table near the edge. The breeze lifted the hair at the back of my neck. I lifted my glass, not high, not for anyone else to see, and whispered, "To the girl they forgot and the woman they can't ignore." Then I drank. The bubbles stung just right. I used to think legacy was something other people handed you. A speech, a plaque, a photo on a wall. Now I know. Legacy is the work you do when no one's clapping. And if you're the one doing it, you get to decide what it's worth.
This is the part of the story where movies usually lie to you. They like the big scene, the father running into the rain to say, "I was wrong," the golden child collapsing into sobs, the mother finally choosing the right daughter. Real life doesn't always give you that. Harper didn't get an apology. She didn't get a speech. She didn't get her name engraved back onto the family wall by committee vote. What she got was something harder to chase and easier to miss: self-respect, and the quiet proof that while her family was busy building a brand, she had been building something heavier: law, protection, precedent, change. After that night, she stopped refreshing her father's estate filings. Like a wound that wouldn't heal, she closed the tab. She opened her inbox instead and said yes to teaching, not because she was stepping away from the fight, but because she was moving it somewhere smarter, into classrooms, into conversations, into the ears of future lawyers who might grow up remembering her name without needing her cropped out of someone else's portrait. She launched a podcast called Unseen Precedents, a place where the invisible labor gets spoken, where the helpers tell their own stories, where legal victories are measured in beds not lost, leases not broken, families not moved out at midnight. An email from the local paper put her on the Housing Equity Advisory Board. Another from a student said, "Your class made me change my career plan. No chandeliers, no champagne, just fluorescent lights, spiral notebooks, and more impact than any ballroom toast." Weeks later, when that cream-colored card arrived from her mother with nothing but "Hope you're well" inside, Harper didn't explode. She didn't frame it. She dropped it in the recycling bin and chose, very simply, not to go back into a story where her only role was to keep the peace and hold the tray. She wrote her own documents, named herself executor of her own trust, signed her own papers. Success didn't ask her father's permission. It didn't need her sister's blessing. It signed its own damn name. And on that rooftop, with one small glass of Prosecco and no audience but the city she'd helped keep standing, Harper toasted the girl she used to be and the woman she had finally become. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt like the ghost at your own family table, if you've ever watched someone else take a bow for work you did in the dark, if you've ever been the helpful one, the strong one, the peacemaker, until you bled out quietly, maybe this is the sign you needed. You are not a missing slide. You are not the cropped edge of someone else's legacy. You are the story. If you want more confessions like Harper's, stories of betrayal, truth, and the kind of emotional revenge that doesn't break the law but still breaks the script, follow the confession stories, hit subscribe, turn on the bell, and share this episode with someone who needs to remember their own worth. I'm Emily. This was Harper's Confession. And I'll see you in the next story.